Are you in love with him and not with me?
I guess I am, George.
Oh, wait a minute. I can handle this proposal from now on. Thanks, son.
Typical Hollywood, and I've often said, it's a fool who uses the movies for real history. But hopefully, if you enjoy the movie and you like history, then maybe a good film will incite someone to read a book and find out what really happened. And I was an addict. I have to say, hey, that's the wrong saddle. That's the wrong gun, you know. And I went through rehab, and now I enjoy films.
Our next guest is a man who is a fast draw gun coach, and he's coached all sorts of people, like Mel Gibson in Maverick, that fancy twirling and everything that Mel does at the card game at the beginning of the movie. Our friend Phil Spangenberger taught him how to do that. Phil also writes for True West, and he was the Guns and Ammo arms editor for years, and he's going to come up and tell us about some of the reasons that the Civil War was important to Westerns. Let's have a big hand for Phil.
Welcome. Hey, Rob.
Howdy, pal. So I see you have, what is that, like a General Lee hat?
Yes, it is. There's a big Civil War reenactment, the largest one west of the Mississippi, November 7th and 8th, out adjacent to Moore Park College. And I'll be portraying General Robert E. Lee, and Bruce Boxleitner will be out there. He'll be my aide, which is pretty good for me to have to say. But there are, like 20 large cannon, 50-something horses, 600 or 700 reenactors, and it's quite a deal. It's really, really big one.
I've been there for it, and it is. Families go out there, it lasts the whole weekends, and you can't believe how authentic they make everything. It's a loud, fun weekend for kids of any age like us. We're going to go have a good time. So The Birth of a Nation really changed things. It made a lot of money. The next Civil War epic was a comedy.
Yes, The General.
And that was based on a real story, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. It later became the Disney film, The Great Locomotive Chase, back in, I think, the 1950s with Fess Parker.
Yep.
But Buster Keaton, I think Disney changed it around. I think they made Fess Parker a Union soldier. And the General originally, Buster Keaton, was a Confederate, a Southern sympathizer. And by the end of the Great Locomotive Chase, in that silent film, they make him a soldier because he wanted to be a soldier, but he was too short and too funny.
It's a great movie, a classic, and the trains they use, I believe they shot that up in Oregon because that's where they found the trains.
Yeah, and there's an original train from probably 1860s or 70s. They all look pretty much similar. And this huge trestle bridge, and they actually destroyed the train and the bridge in the movie. It wasn't a prop or set up in a miniature. It was the real deal.
Not digital?
Not digital, no. In fact, the hundreds of men that you see in the battle scenes were real people.
Wow. And it's an epic film, and it's hysterical. Very, very, very funny. The early 30s, when sound came in, there were a few other Civil War related movies. D.W. Griffith tried to make a comeback with Abraham Lincoln with Walter Houston in 1930. That was his last movie, though, and it didn't bring him back. It did not lose money, but it didn't bring him back to the prominence that he had once had in the silent films. And so that was a disappointment. But some of the other ones I know were The Littlest Rebel with Shirley Temple. She did 2 Civil War related movies, too. And Hal Roach, because Spanky McFarland was the second biggest child star at the time. They did General Spanky with Our Gang Kids and Alfalfa. It didn't do that well, but...
There's a reason why, if you ever watch it.
So obviously the next giant Civil War movie was Gone with the Wind.
Yeah, Gone with the Wind. Interestingly, in the 20s, the 30s, 40s, all the way up to the 70s with... the outlaw Josie Wales. The way, the Civil War was the largest single event, and you can argue that with anybody, but it's the largest single event in American history. And it shaped us as a nation. We'd only been around 80-something years, and we were falling apart. And you imagine, you hear the politics today and how polarized people are, Democrats, Republicans, et cetera. But just imagine to the point where they actually go to firing upon each other and wage war. It's just really unbelievable. And you were saying 650,000. I recently read a report where they've been considering people that died from wounds and so on, and the number is up to 750,000, 750,000 Americans, because whoever was killed was an American, each side. But in the 20s, 30s, 40s, on up through the 70s, the Confederacy was depicted very much so as the lost cause, and it was depicted very romantic. In the 1950s, there was a great TV series that ran for about 2 seasons called The Gray Ghost, about Confederate raider John Singleton Mosby. And you had all these movies, Randolph Scott, Errol Flynn, Rocky Mountain, where he was a Confederate trying to sneak gold to Richmond from the West. And there were all these films like that.
Even The Searchers, John Wayne comes back after the Civil War.
He's an ex-Confederate. So many Westerns were made where the Civil War was either a crucial part of the plot, or the character was a veteran or someone deserting or whatever, or even as a subplot, or in some instances, just the characterization of some of the people. How many scenes have you seen where the Southerners start singing Dixie or the Bonnie Blue Flag, and then the Yankees come up with one of their songs, and then you get a big barroom brawl?
There was a great sequence in Walter Hill's The Long Riders where that happens, right at the beginning of the movie. It's about the James gang and the Younger brothers, and there's a scene that it just really is tense because of that. And it was typical of what was going on across the country, and to capture it in films, which they did over and over again. Part of what almost every Western had as a core.
Yeah. Red River. I mean, you name it. One of the cattlemen is wearing a Confederate uniform. Almost any film you can name, there's some hint of some sort about the Civil War, North or South.
Oh, another film, Santa Fe Trail with Errol Flynn, had Ronald Reagan, and how authentic was any of that?
It was perfect. I can say that. Well, Custer never knew Reagan. I can say that.
Errol Flynn as Captain Jeb Stuart. Raymond Massey as the infamous John Brown. Ronald Reagan, the Gipper of Notre Dame, as gallant George Custer. History springs to flaming life as they carve a path through the wilderness. Robert E. Lee, Sheridan, Longstreet, Pickett, Hood, Tex Bell, and Windy Brody, the famous Prairie Scouts.
Jeb Stuart, Custer, and I forget who else they were supposed to represent. They took all these historical characters and threw them together in Kansas fighting John Brown. the historical reality was that John Brown, was one of the big reasons, the slavery and the anti-slavery movement with the red, what do they call them, the Redlegs and the Jayhawkers, the slavers and the anti-slavers, and John Brown with his raid at Pottawatomie Creek, and all these things were real events, but they threw in all these characters. How Jeb Stuart was involved, he was only involved in Virginia when Brown raided Harper's Ferry. Robert E. Lee, as a colonel in the U.S. Army, was put in charge of the rescue force to go to Virginia and Harper's Ferry. Jeb Stuart, I believe, was on leave, and he was a friend with Lee because he had been a cadet under Lee at West Point, and he wound up being part of the rescue force, and he was the first man actually in the building. He was the one that went up and demanded the surrender, and they fired a pistol at him, and he dodged that, and Jeb Stuart had good luck for many years up to Yellow Tavern in 1864 when he was shot.
Are you in love with him and not with me?
I guess I am, George.
Oh, wait a minute. I can handle this proposal from now on. Thanks, son.
Typical Hollywood, and I've often said, it's a fool who uses the movies for real history. But hopefully, if you enjoy the movie and you like history, then maybe a good film will incite someone to read a book and find out what really happened and who was really there and so on. And I was an addict. I have to say, hey, that's the wrong saddle. That's the wrong gun, And I went through rehab, and now I enjoy films.
And you're much better for it now.
I enjoy films for what they are.
Well, so with Ken Burns, he's still a little shaky, but things are better now because perhaps of Ken Burns. What do you think of his documentary series?
I think it's great. When I first saw it, I felt that he and don't get me wrong, I'm not a slaver, but I had the feeling that he was putting too much emphasis on the Civil War being fought over slavery as slavery. It was an important event, and it was part of states' rights. But it wasn't until Lincoln, and he actually describes that later, if you really pay attention to it, he says that Lincoln turned the war into from keeping the Union together, which most of the men were fighting for in the North, to freeing the slaves. And even up through the end of the war, a lot of the white men, the white soldiers said, I'll be damned if I want to die for some darky. That's just the way they felt in those times. It was a different time. Interestingly, today, there seems to be more vitriol against Southern soldiers and the Confederacy, etc., than it was in the time of the war, because when Lee surrendered, the Union Army saluted the Confederates marched by out of respect, because they said, one soldier said they were probably the bravest men that man ever created, but they fought for probably what they thought was the worst cause. So they had a lot of empathy towards these people, and times are so different.
Well, one of the films that was a big game changer, Freddie Fields made the film Glory.
Yes,
which
that
was really unusual.
Very touching.
What are your thoughts about that in terms of how realistic that might have been?
I thought Glory was very authentic. They had historic characters in their proper places. They talked about the trouble that Shaw had, the colonel of the 54th Massachusetts, the trouble that he had getting his men proper uniforming, proper weaponry, training to be soldiers, and then actually to fight. And the fight, the storming of Fort Wagner was it was virtually a suicide mission. But men in those days, they fought 18th century tactics with 19th century, almost 20th century weapons. Weapons that could hit accurately at 350 to 500 yards, yet they were anywhere from 50 to 70 yards apart and charging in mass. But Shaw was a patriot, and he and his men felt that this was something they needed to do for all of the black fighters, and to show that they had the courage, they could fight as well as anybody, and they paid the price. But after a while, there were more and more black men. Black men fought on both sides. There were black men that enlisted to the South. Something like 30,000 black men, whether they were slaves or freedmen, they fought. And a lot of the Southerners that fought, they did not fight for slavery as such. Probably less than 5% of the Confederate soldiers were able to own a slave, but they were fighting because, as one Confederate prisoner was being interviewed by a Yankee soldier, and he just said, "Why are you fighting?" And he said, "Well, because you're down here." They were fighting to protect their home. And people need to remember that. When we do this Civil War reenactment, Bruce and I and some of the fellas, the school children come out and they interview us, and we are supposed to answer first person. And they'll ask me questions like, "Why are you fighting?" And I tell them, I said, "Well, because the North came down to invade our homes, and we're protecting our homeland, my family." And they say, "What's the hardest thing about being a soldier?" And I say, "Staying alive." But I'm happy to say that because of that Moore Park and the allowing the school, the high school kids to interview us, they won a national contest in history, and they credited the Civil War reenactment for that. So we're very proud of that.
And we're proud of you too, Phil.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Perfect.
I wish I was in the land of cotton. Old times there are not forgotten. Look away,
Look away,
look away,
look away,
look away,
look away,
Dixie Land. In Dixie's land where I was born in early on one frosty morning. Look away,
Look away,
look away,
look away,
look away,
look away,
Dixieland. I wish I was in Dixie. Hooray,
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 hooray.
In Dixie's land I'll take my stand to live and die in Dixie. Away,
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 away down south in Dixie. Away,
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 away down south in Dixie. Truth is marching, 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 truth is marching on.
His truth is marching.
A truth is marching on.
Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
He
is trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He has loosed the fateful lightning of his terrible swift sword. His truth is marching.
The truth is marching on.
Glory, glory, hallelujah.
Truth is marching on.
Glory, glory, hallelujah.
Is marching on.
Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching.
A truth is marching on.
In the beauty of the lilies, Christ was born across the sea.
With a
Glory in his bosom that transfigures you and
A truth
me.
is marching
As he
on.
died to make men holy, let us live to make men free. His truth is marching.
A truth is marching on. Truth
Glory,
is marching. Truth
glory,
is marching. Truth is marching. Truth is marching. Truth
Glory, glory, hallelujah.
Truth is marching. Truth is marching. Truth is marching.
Glory,
Truth is marching.
hallelujah. His truth is marching on. His truth is marching.
Truth is marching.
Truth is marching. Truth is marching on.
Thanks a lot, folks. The Saguaro Sisters, Shona, Corona, Katrona.